Right. So the next session is on lung, and I would like to invite Dr. Shekhar Patil from Bengaluru to chair the session and take it from here. Dr. Shekhar Patil.
Yeah, thank you, sir, Dr. Sumant, and the organizing committee for having given me this opportunity to chair this last session that is on the lung cancer. We will try and stick on. I'll request all the speakers to stick on to the time so that we will be able to finish in time. And this is a pre-lunch session, and I'll be calling on Dr. Jyoti Wadhwa. She is from New Delhi, and she is a director, head and neck and thoracic oncology from the Medanta Hospital, Delhi. She will be speaking to us on how to maximize the patient outcomes in EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer. It is over to you, Dr. Jyoti, for the talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Patil, for the introduction. The topic assigned to me is how to maximize patient outcomes in EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer. Also discuss mainly about the role of sequencing in treating such patients. So we know that in 2021, we are practicing precision oncology, and this journey in non-small cell lung cancer, which was EGFR mutation positive, started way back in 2003 with Geftinib getting the FDA approval. And since then, we have come a long way, and we now have not only Geftinib, but some other TKIs which are classified into first generation, second generation, and now even third generation TKIs. We have to learn that all these three classes of agents, TKIs, are inherently different. Some, like the first generation, are reversible inhibitors. The second generation and the third generation are irreversible covalent binding exhibitors. And osimertinib, in fact, is specific for EGFR T790M mutant cases. So when we offer a TKI to one such patient, we have to choose wisely and rightly. So how do we do that? We have to also know of some facts that in our lab studies, we have seen there is some evidence that the clonal composition of the tumor may change over time with the sequential EGFR TKI use. It has been seen that after the use of first generation TKIs, the tumor clones become more heterogeneous. After the use of second generation TKIs, including afatinib, however, the clonal expansion is more homogeneous. And with the use of third generation TKIs, the tumor clones become again very heterogeneous, thereby reducing the availability of possible targeted therapies. So this was hypothesis generating. The molecular mechanisms of acquired resistance to the TKIs have also been deciphered to some extent till date, and T790M is said to be the most common cause of acquired resistance after the use of first generation TKI in this group of patients. We have learned that almost 50 to 70% of these patients do develop T790M mutation. The likelihood of developing this mutation is highest in those with deletion 19 disease. The mechanisms are, however, a bit different when we use first-line osimertinib, and most of the acquired resistance then is not really targetable except when there is MET amplification involved, or there are other mutations like MET amplification responsible for almost 15%, and another important mechanism of histologic transformation to small cell histology, which has been documented to happen in 14% of patients after osimertinib. So what is the best way forward? So different options were explored, and one of them was sequencing of the various generation of TKIs. In fact, the combination of TKI with chemotherapy has also been studied in detail. So let me focus on the sequencing now. So if we start a patient on first or second generation TKI, we follow them up, and depending on the mechanism of acquired resistance, we change the therapy subsequently. So if the patient develops T790M mutation, we change the patient then on progression to osimertinib. And however, if the patient is negative for T790M, if we are able to identify another specific mechanism such as MET amplification or HER2/neu amplification, then we change to a specific targeted therapy. Or if there isn't any of those, then we put the patient on chemotherapy. If we start the patient on third generation TKI osimertinib, then more often than not, chemotherapy remains the only sensible option unless we identify some specific mechanism of acquired resistance. Now let's see how many patients can benefit actually from this sequencing. So 80% of patients treated with afatinib in the first line do end up receiving a second line therapy. 50 to 70% of these patients do actually develop a T790M mutation on afatinib, and this likelihood of acquiring this way of resistance is higher in patients with deletion 19 disease to the tune of 75%. So there is a significant proportion of patients who could still benefit from third generation TKI after the failure of afatinib. So keeping this in mind, a study, GEOTAG study, was undertaken. This studied the sequence of afatinib followed by osimertinib in a real world scenario. So this was a global observational study across 10 countries, and it included patients with EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer who harbored common mutations such as deletion 19 or L858R. They had to be TKI naive, had to have advanced non-small cell lung cancer, they had to be adults, and the performance status of patients could be up to 3. So initially these patients were treated with first line afatinib, and upon progression, those who developed T790M mutation were to receive second line osimertinib. The primary objective was to study time on treatment of afatinib, and the secondary objective was to study overall survival and to study the effect in various subgroups. So is this GEOTAG study applicable in clinical study? So we know the benefits of real world evidence. We have done it not only here in lung cancer but also in various other entities. The beauty was that both stage 3B4 non-small cell lung cancer patients were included. There was no cutoff on minimum duration of afatinib use, and neither was there a cutoff on the duration of osimertinib use. However, patients must have initiated osimertinib at least 10 months prior to data collection, and this was done to avoid early censoring or inadequate data maturity. So this was important. Even those patients who, just in case could get only for a day afatinib were also part of this observational study. So GEOTAG study in fact included much broader range of patients which otherwise do get excluded from a clinical trial. So to name some, the age, the patients who were more than 65 years of age in fact constituted 35% of this GEOTAG study. There was no restriction on the initial dose of the patients. In fact, 1/6 of patients who were initiated on afatinib got it at a dose less than 40 milligrams per day. And even patients whose performance status was 2 or 3 were also included in the GEOTAG study. However, loss to follow-up, polypharmacy, and lower compliance do remain an issue because there was no control over them. However, some measures were taken to reduce selection bias, such as that only consecutive patients fulfilling all the inclusion criteria were included. Enrollment was limited to 15 patients per site. Patients with baseline brain mets and those with the ECOG performance status more than 2 were also included, up to 3 as I said. And there was no cutoff on minimum duration of afatinib or osimertinib use. So even those, as I said earlier, who got it for just 1 day got included in this study. So what did this study show, the GEOTAG study? It showed that the median time on treatment with afatinib was 11.9 months, which is actually quite similar to the progression-free survival reported in earlier studies of afatinib, namely Lux Lung 3, 6, and 7. So quite similar. The time on treatment for the sequential treatment with afatinib followed by osimertinib was an impressive 27.7 months. The patients who harbor deletion 19 were to benefit even more because the time on treatment in them was 30 months, and in Asian patients it was even better to the tune of 37 months, that is 3 years time on treatment on this sequence in Asian patients. Coming to the overall survival with this sequencing, the median OS was 37.6 months in the overall population, and 80% of the patients had the 2-year survival probability. The patients who had performance status of even 2 or more also benefited, and the median time on treatment in them was 32 months, which is not bad at all. The patients with deletion 19, the median OS was 41.6 months, and the Asian patients did even better, with median OS being 44.8 months. The patients who had brain mets also benefited. The median time in these patients was 22 months compared to 28 months when there were no brain metastasis. Patients who were greater than 65 years of age also had significant benefit from this sequential therapy. So this sequencing did seem to benefit irrespective of age and irrespective of whether they had brain mets or no brain mets. So summary of the results: overall median time on treatment 27.7 months, and compare this with 40 months median time on treatment in Asian patients with deletion 19. The median overall survival similarly for the overall group was 37.6 months, and this was 45 months in Asians with deletion 19. 2-year probability of survival 80% in the overall group, and 94% of being alive at 2 years in Asian patients with deletion 19. Were there any safety concerns? So discontinuation rates with afatinib actually were not different when you compare with other TKIs, and this slide lists the discontinuation rates due to adverse event in various Lux lung trials, and also you could compare with the FLAURA osimertinib discontinuation rates, and they were quite comparable. Now the dose modification, the median PFS was actually similar in patients who had afatinib dose reduction. So we all know we find giving 40 milligrams once a day in our practice a bit difficult, and most of our patients do end up getting started and staying on 30 milligrams a day. So it was encouraging to know that the dose adjustment of afatinib reduces the adverse events without compromising the efficacy, because those who remained on 40 milligrams a day, the median time on treatment was 19.4 months, and those who were started and remained on 30 milligrams had 19.5 months median time on afatinib. So there was no difference there. So after the FLAURA, we did change our practice, but is osimertinib really the best choice in first line? The drawback was that osimertinib in the trial was compared with first generation TKI and not against second generation TKI. Most common mutation post osimertinib is MET amplification, and most common second line option following osimertinib failure does remain chemotherapy. And in fact, there was no clear benefit in Asian subpopulation with osimertinib over first generation TKI. And also less than 1/3 of patients received osimertinib in second line in geftinib arm. So all these points have to be kept in mind when we choose the treatment. So GeoTag take home points: this is the first study, though observational and retrospective, to evaluate time on treatment with afatinib and osimertinib in non-small cell lung cancer. The study population did include those with performance status more than 2 and 2, also included patients with brain mets. The median OS was 37.6 months in the overall study population. Measures were undertaken to reduce the bias, and the response with afatinib was similar to the previously reported PFS in the various Lux lung trials. And the OS in those with deletion 19, ECOG performance status 0 and 1, and Asian population was really encouraging. So this is how it shows in pictorial form, the impressive results reported in the GeoTag study with the sequential study. So the final GeoTag data reported last year does support the use of sequential treatment with afatinib followed by osimertinib, particularly for Asian group and patients with deletion 19 subtype of EGFR mutation. However, we must remember the limitations of this study, that it was retrospective. There remains a potential for selection bias, and there was no comparator arm. So how should we sequence new EGFR therapies? We are now aware of these three possibilities and options, namely sequential use of second generation followed by third generation TKI followed by chemotherapy on failure of these, or you could start with third generation TKI and then switch to chemo on failure, or you could also opt to use a TKI with chemo to begin with. But how do we choose? So we must keep in mind, and I'm sure we all in our practice do use these deciding factors when we are deciding as to what is the best EGFR TKI for this subgroup of patients with lung cancer. We obviously know of the data related to the efficacy. We have to know the tolerability with respect to individual given patient characteristics. We have to keep in mind not only the efficacy, but health related quality of life also. Each individual physician's own experience with a drug and personal preference are also important. We have to have our own level of comfort with the use of a particular drug. Treatment sequencing is an important option, but we have to keep in mind the cost and reimbursement issues also. We should also take into consideration the relative reported efficacy in different ethnic populations. Even in those with brain mets, those without brain mets, the two populations may differ with regard to different TKIs. And we are still not sure of the optimal treatment for elderly patients or those with significant comorbidity burdens. So to conclude, I would like to say that the definition of optimal therapy, however, will require further improvements in the monitoring of molecular evolution of tumors and also monitoring of mechanisms of resistance during the course of several lines of the therapy for EGFR mutation positive non-small cell lung cancer. So this will continue to evolve. The data will come up, and we have to continuously keep our information up to date to be able to offer the best possible treatment to our patients. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jyoti, for a nice talk. And are there any questions in the question box? I have not seen any questions. So if there are no questions, I think thank you for the nice talk, and you brought us so nicely that how to sequence based on the mutation analysis, and it was very comprehensive. Thank you, Dr. Jyoti. And we'll move on to the next talk, the diagnosis and the management of the uncommon mutations, the importance of the molecular testing, and how to choose the best TKI. To speak on this, we have got a very good speaker, Dr. Ranadeep Singh from New Delhi. He is a director and a senior consultant at the Narayana Super Speciality Hospital, Gurgaon. And it is over to you, Dr. Ranadeep, for the talk.
Thank you, Chairperson. And of course, it is always nice to hear and get introduced by seniors like Dr. Shekhar Patil. And thanks, Boehringer, for having me here. This is a bit more of a simple talk and not very complicated, because it is not very complicated, I will say, as of 2020, but we are pretty sure that this space, especially with respect to exon 20, is also getting crowded, and that is actually good for a medical oncologist. So what I will be talking about, Dr. Jyoti has already alluded to exon 21 and 19, which forms almost 90% of the mutations in EGFR domain. The another 10% are these uncommon mutations. And as you opt more and more for NGS based technologies, for multiplex PCR based technologies, this actually in practice, you are actually seeing around 10% of rare mutations. Now, among these rare mutations, the large chunk is formed by these three mutations, which form almost 1/4 of this chunk, which is G719X, L861X, and S768I. I will be coming to the details to these three mutations. Apart from that, we have exon 20 insertions in 16%. And this exon 20 is actually quite heterogeneous. In spite of having NGS and advanced technologies of somatic mutation profiling, there is still 1/4 chunk where we just label it as other mutations. Maybe these are so rare and maybe the literature has not yet evolved. So this is how we all know the EGFR domain looks like. Now there are a couple of points. One of the most difficult domains I feel to understand is exon 20. You may have an exon 20 insertion as well as mutations. Both of them behave differently because point mutations are S7681. And we will see in this literature also, and as well as the literature with respect to newer drugs such as poziotinib as well as monoclonal antibodies are there, which are more directed towards exon 20 insertions rather than point mutations. And also when you have a HER2 amplification, that is a totally different disease. So we all have to understand practically that though we label it as exon 20, but in itself insertions, point mutations, as well as HER2 amplifications, they all three behave differently. Coming to exon 21 and 19, the exon 21 has L861Q, which is a rare mutation. So always use, when we see the report, especially with respect to PCR or NGS, apart from seeing the exon 21 or 19 label, please have a look on the type of mutation, because sometimes it may not matter, but like L861Q as of now, it may not matter. But as we go down the slides and we have the literature evolving, the type of mutations also do matter. Exon 18 are also very difficult to treat because of poor prognosis. There is some role of course, EGFR TKIs in this domain. So when we talk about IC50, and we all know IC50 is the minimum concentration of the drug, which is, I mean, it's the inhibitory concentration of the drug. If you see the curves in the bar diagram as well as in the graphs for afatinib, whether it is L858R or commonest mutation vis-a-vis rare mutations, the IC50 does not vary much. Whereas for other first generation as well as third generation TKIs, such as erlotinib or osimertinib, there is a big difference in the IC50 with respect to L858R versus other rare mutations. Coming to afatinib, which is one of the one of the topic of interest in this talk, since now when we talk about afatinib, the data is with respect to rare mutations comes from these three trials. We all know Lux 3, Lux Lung 6 were the trials where afatinib was compared with chemotherapy, and these were also registration trials for this molecule done almost 8 or 9 years before. Now in these three trials, in spite of having around 700 patients, we have only 75 patients who were having rare mutations. And this is the data for the rare mutations. Now they had classified into group 1, where they have talked about point mutations. As already said in the previous slide, G719X is one of the common ones, and the others like L861Q. One more peculiar thing when we talk about uncommon mutations, and you will see in this slide, are that usually they come as complex mutations. Usually they come as combined with some other mutations. It is not like a routine garden variety exon 19 or 21 mutations. They are usually coupled with each other, and that's why they don't have such a strong driver in the EGFR, and that's why their responses are muted. Now, group 2 is simpler to understand with respect to the newer molecules like osimertinib, which has evolved, where rarely you may have a de novo T790M alone or with common or uncommon mutations. And the most difficult group to treat among these uncommon mutations is group 3, exon 20 insertions. Now, the response rates, if you see, there are beautiful responses happening in the group 1, whereas a de novo T790 or an exon 20 insertion, both of them have a poor responses. Now, once you have a response, even in this group 2, group 3, which is only 10% of the patients, their PFS is not very bad. It is around 8 months, whereas we know that the median PFS of afatinib in the common mutation is around 13 months, whereas it is 11 months in point mutations. So that is why I said in the beginning that you have to be very particular that what domain you are dealing and what is the type of mutation you are. It is not only 20 or 18 or 19 or 21. The type of mutation point mutation, duplication, amplification, everything matters now in the EGFR domain. So I do tell my patients that if in exon 20, when you face it at least once in a 6 months now by ordering NGS, we do tell them that you can start on afatinib. The response rates are low, but if you respond, there is an expected median duration of around 7 months. This is a waterfall plot showing a similar things, that group 2 are the one which are doing badly, group 3 are responding, and group 1, which are point mutations in the rare domains, are doing still better. Coming to particular 3 subgroups which are seen most common: G719X, L861Q, and S7681. There are reasonably good responses in these 3, which are more than 70%. And once they respond, the median PFS is around 13 months, 14 months, which is similar to the common mutations. There is also evolving data of osimertinib. This is a phase 2 trial, which is a dedicated trial for uncommon mutations. The response rates are not that bad in the 3 common mutations, but what matters is the median PFS, which is 8 months. And if we compare the results of osimertinib in the common mutations like FLAURA, definitely median PFS is not satisfactory in this subset. Also, there are some real world evidence. These have been published as, I will say, more of anecdotal reports, as you can see in this, that first generation, which is erlotinib, gefitinib, has been compared to second generation, which is a red line. There is definitely a much better median PFS when you compare afatinib with gefitinib or erlotinib in rare mutation subset. Now, there is one of the backup or strength which a clinician gets is from this database, because whatever database we look in uncommon mutations, rarely you have a 3-digit number. Maximum numbers have been range of 50 to 75, except this subset where afatinib. This is a database. It is not a study. It is not a it's not a phase 2, phase 3 trial. It is a database collection of 693 cases, and out of them, it is interesting to note that 315 have been treated with the first line EGFR TKI, and another 378, which is a bigger number than the previous number, have already been subjected to a first generation EGFR TKI. So this approximately we have 693 patients who are having 98 different uncommon mutations, and this is one of the largest database. It is published in Journal of Thoracic Oncology in 2020. Now, among this subset, one of the one of the majority of them numbers goes to the G719, L861Q, and S7681. Again, 40%, almost half of them are among these. You have 1/4 of exon 20 insertions, and then you have compound mutations where you have 2 or 3 mutations together, and T719, 11%. Now, among all these uncommon mutations, if you see, there is a remarkably satisfactory response rate to my mind, except exon 20 and T790. Again, the group 2, group 3, which we were talking about in the previous slides. And if you see here again, that these are the 2 subsets which are really doing bad. And we need to actually discuss that how do we use our current strategy, and like, do we really combine the chemotherapy with EGFR TKI in this subset, or we only give them chemotherapy? And we also have to remember that there are a couple of data where TKIs have been combined with anti-VEGF, such as erlotinib with ramucirumab or osimertinib with bevacizumab. So are these subsets where we may be using such combinations to provide benefit? I am also aware of the trial data such as poziotinib and adamantinib, but till those drugs are not available in our country, we need to have our personalized approach, especially when we face exon 20 insertions, especially upfront. Now, outcomes have been again quite fine with afatinib with respect to common uncommon mutations. But when you have an exon 20 insertion, de novo T790M, again, the median time to treatment failure is actually not very hopeful. Now, to summarize, so when we talk about uncommon mutations, that is 10% of our total EGFR mutations, there is a 71% overall response rate. and point mutations will be doing better. Both the pooled analysis of 690 patients as well as the pooled analysis of Lux Lung 3, 6, and 2, there is a median PFS of 11 months. And if you delete exon 20 insertions from this subset, you will have actually a favorable or a satisfactory response. There is very less data with respect to osimertinib. The response rates are 50%, still coping up with afatinib, but the median PFS is not very satisfactory. And definitely, first generation EGFR TKIs are a no-no in this uncommon EGFR mutations. So with this, thanks for patient hearing, and over to the chairperson and organizers.
Thank you, Dr. Nandip, for such a nice talk in such a short time. You made us understand so clearly, and you made us understand how we should read EGFR mutation. Just we read only deletion 19 and leave it up. You brought out a very good point. I think we should go into the critically analyze the report properly so that we'll be able to select the TKs in a proper way. And if you see an uncommon mutation with the present data, if you find an uncommon mutation, would you like to prefer afatinib or osimertinib is okay in that group also?
Sir, I also said in the talk, leaving exon 20 insertions, if I have a point mutation, I will be happy to give a point mutation and there is no T790M, then definitely I would like to go for afatinib.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sandeep, what if there is a T790M mutation in addition to exon 19 deletion?
I would like to go with osimertinib in that case, Manish, because
and if the patient cannot afford osimertinib, then
chemotherapy. And if you can combine, I mean, it's difficult to combine chemo with afatinib because that will be there is no.
What about gefitinib? The afatinib doesn't have any efficacy against T790M, practically nil. So gefitinib plus chemo.
Yes,
the patient has exon 19 deletion also.
Yes, I was about to come to that either chemotherapy or a chemo with not afatinib but gefitinib. I was about to come to that point. And yes, there are two drugs which we look upon. There is a breakthrough approval for poziotinib as well as adamantinib, but those two are again in exon 20 insertion. A T790 with
not for T790M. It's all exon 20 insertion.
Yes, they are not for T790M. And a T790M with L858R will be a complex mutation. Again, the data is very difficult. I will be slightly tilted to give chemo with or without gefitinib in that case.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nandip, and thank you very much for a nice talk. And we'll move on to the next talk on BRAF mutation in metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. To speak on this one, we have got Dr. Manish Singhal. He is one of the senior medical oncologists at the Apollo Hospital, Delhi, and he is a ESMO medical certified medical oncologist. And it is over to you, Dr. Manish, for the talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good to see you, sir.
Thank you very much. So nice.
So can I share my slide set? Yeah. Okay. So thanks everyone, and thanks to the organizers and Wattis for giving this opportunity. And so the topic for today would be the personalized therapy to further improve the outcomes in patients with BRAF mutated non-small cell lung cancer. The next slide. The next. The next. The next. The next. Yeah. So we know that. So the previous slide. So we know that BRAF is a downstream signaling pathway from which is led from the EGFR signaling, and it goes through the KRAS, the BRAF, the MEK, and the MAPK pathway, and causes constitutive activation of, and which results into proliferation, invasion, and metastasis. And the BRAF is not only mutated in non-small cell lung cancer; it was actually first detected in melanoma, followed by colorectal, thyroid, where it is much more commoner than non-small cell lung cancer. In non-small cell lung cancer, it accounts for about 2 to 3% of total non-small cell lung cancers. Next slide. We also understand that that it is the V600E mutation which is the key mutation, and that occurs in about 50 to 70% of total BRAF mutations is V600E mutations. However, there are certain other mutations also which may or may not be as important, which may be inhibited by the BRAF targeting drugs. Also, it is seen that it may not be strongly associated with age, sex, or the stage of the disease or smoking status, and there may be differential history of smoking, although it is seen more likely to be in females, and also those who have had some history of smoking, and the data we will see just now. Next slide. So as I said that the BRAF V600E is the most common BRAF mutation. Of the 3% total BRAF mutations that we see in non-small cell lung cancer, about 2% are V600E. Rest 1% can be some other mutations, and we don't really know whether the BRAF targeting drugs are as efficacious in these particular other than V600E mutations or not. Next slide. So it is it has been understood that the BRAF mutated non-small cell lung cancer is an aggressive tumor, and vis-a-vis if we compare with the wild type or the non-mutated non-small cell lung cancer, BRAF V600E mutated lung cancers, as we understand for colon cancer, they do poorly as compared to the wild type non-small cell lung cancers, and this is very akin to what happens in colon cancer as well. The next slide. So about 33% of total BRAF V600E mutations, positive mutations may not be even eligible to receive first-line therapy, and about another 57% may not be even eligible to receive second-line therapy. So they tend to progress fast, they have poorer prognosis. So it is important that they receive the best possible treatment upfront rather than waiting to receive this treatment as a second line, because many of these patients will progress quite fast and become ineligible for any further therapy. So therefore, it is important that driver mutations be treated, those patients who have driver mutations be treated with targeted therapies as soon as possible, or as soon as we learn about such mutations. Next slide. So this has been the current treatment guidelines for unselected population of non-small cell lung cancer. Usually we treat them with either a combination of chemotherapy with bevacizumab, or if they are eligible for immunotherapy, then perhaps with chemotherapy and immunotherapy, and then they go on to maintenance therapies. And those patients who are not eligible for active therapy, they go on to best supportive care. Next slide. So it is needless to emphasize that broad molecular profiling has become almost mandatory, and we should be testing for a broad molecular profiling, not only EGFR, ALK, and ROS1, but BRAF, as well as MET, and also KRAS and HER2 and PD-L1 and other such testing, because now the armamentarium is expanding as far as various targeted therapies are being made available to patients. They may not be available in our country, but then they are being made available. Next slide. So this is the overall consensus in the standard guidelines that most clinicians follow, that these mutation testing should be done, especially emphasizing on BRAF, that this is one new mutation which should be tested in all patients, including the EGFR, the BRAF, the ALK, ROS1. So BRAF has definitely been included. Next slide. So this we have already covered. Next slide, please. So we are coming to the clinical data of dabrafenib and trametinib. The trade name is Refinelar and Mexel. So this is the molecule. They are active against the BRAF V600E, and the trametinib is active against the MEK inhibition. Next slide, please. And this is a DCGI approved indication for non-small cell lung cancer, which is harboring V600E mutation. Next slide. So it is important that that when we inhibit the BRAF, we also must inhibit the MEK inhibition, because if you inhibit only BRAF, there is likely to be resistance against the BRAF by upregulation of MEK, and this can result into early termination of effect. So therefore, it is important that they are used in combination. A BRAF inhibitor is used in combination with the MEK inhibition, and this lesson has been quite well learned with with what we have learned from melanoma. Next slide. So this is the phase 2 trial, which randomized patients into 3 cohorts. And cohort A was those patients who were treated with dabrafenib as a monotherapy. Cohort B was a combination of dabrafenib and tremelimumab in a pre-treated population. And cohort C was again the combination in a untreated population. Next slide. And these were the primary endpoints, overall response rate being the primary endpoint, and secondary endpoints being overall survival and progression-free survival and duration of response. Of course, safety was one of the features of secondary endpoints. Next slide. So if you look at the entire data, you can see that it is almost a one-third divide between never smokers, smokers with less than 30 pack years of history, or smokers with more than 30 pack years of history. So smoking may or may not be associated. It's not that never smokers have more chance of having a BRAF mutation. All of them were adenocarcinomas. And so next slide. Next slide. Next. Yeah. So it is seen that adenocarcinomas, almost all patients had adenocarcinomas. There may be adenosquamous carcinomas, but that was rare. So almost all of them had adenocarcinomas. About one-third had no smoking history. It was more common in females as compared to males. Next slide. So these were the 3 cohorts which have already been described. Next slide. So when we look at cohort A, that is treatment with dabrafenib alone, that is only a BRAF inhibitor, we see that the response rate is hovering around 33%, with the duration of response being 9.6 months, and the progression-free survival almost about half a year, and overall survival is about a year. Next slide. Yeah. So when we come to cohort B, the cohort B has an overall response rate of around 63%, which is almost doubling of the response rate with dabrafenib alone. So when we treat with dabrafenib plus tremelimumab, there is almost doubling of the response rate, which reaches about 63% with a very impressive waterfall plot. Next slide. And the duration of response is in excess of 9 months. And you can see that many patients have everlasting responses also. And this is about previously treated patients. Next slide. And the median progression-free survival is, as per the investigators, is about 9 months. So that's the ballpark figure. So it's almost practically doubling of the progression-free survival if we were to treat with dabrafenib alone versus dabrafenib versus the combination of dabrafenib and tremelimumab. Next slide. So these are the response rate in cohort C. In untreated population, again, the response rate is about 64%, very similar. Duration of response, very similar. And the median overall survival is almost about a year or so. Next slide. Next slide. So in an untreated population, you almost achieve the same. If you go by the investigator, it is around 10.4 months, whereas the duration of response is about 15 months in the independent review. Next slide. And the progression-free survival is about 10.9 months versus 14.6 months by the independent review. So it's almost quite similar. So in case a patient is unable to receive the BRAF targeted therapy and receives it after certain chemotherapies, you are likely to receive the almost similar benefit from the BRAF inhibition, the dabrafenib and tremelimumab combination, if you were to treat in first line. Next slide. So this is the trial data, putting all the cohorts into one graph, into one picture. It's 5.5 months, 9.7 months, and 10.9 months PFS between the different cohorts. So definitely there's sense of using dabrafenib in combination with tremelimumab. However, you don't lose out much on the response if you put it as a second-line drug, as we see in many EGFR targeted therapies. When they go into second line, they lose the progression-free survival. But here you don't lose much, but you definitely run the risk of losing the patient to progressive disease and not being eligible to receive any therapy. Next slide. So pyrexia is one of the most common toxicities. Next slide. Other than the routine side effects, skin-related side effects, decreased appetite, and nausea, and sometimes digestive issues. Next slide. Next slide. So pyrexia remains one of the most important side effects. I think that one needs to keep in mind and not get worried, because one will definitely need to differentiate from an infective etiology than drug-induced fever or pyrexia. And the treatment of choice for pyrexia is, next slide. Next. The treatment of choice, next slide. Is you may have to interrupt therapy and use antipyretics. In case that is not working out, then you can add some steroids in low doses, such as prednisolone 10 milligram, and try to cut down on the doses if it recurs in the second time. Next slide. So these are the guidelines. I think they're very, very clear. In the first event, you may have to administer some antipyretics, may have to interrupt dabrafenib, or even the combination. Perhaps one can continue trametinib for a while. Once the pyrexia resolves, one can restart dabrafenib at the same dose level. If there's a second event, you may have to add some steroids or interrupt dabrafenib and optimize the steroid use and use dabrafenib at the next dose level. Next slide. So these are the starting doses: 150 milligram BID, and the first decrease would be 200 milligram BID and then 50 milligram BID. Whereas for trametinib, it is 2 milligram once a day, and the first dose reduction is 1.5 milligram and then 1 milligram. And in case the toxicity does recur and become permanent, then you may have to permanently discontinue, but that happens in a very minority of patients, about 10% or so. Next slide. So the safety profile is quite manageable, similar to that what has been previously reported in melanoma studies. The adverse events include pyrexia, GI-related, and skin toxicities. Pyrexia being the most common side effect. Some side effects of special interest is the cardiac venous thromboembolism, and one need to do a left ventricular ejection fraction measurement every 3 months. These are of some special interest, which if you look at the package insert, you'll find that. And you must be doing echocardiography once in 3 months, and look out for venous thromboembolisms. Next slide. So with this, I thank you for your kind attention, and I'll hand over the proceedings to the organizers.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you for
Thank
a
you,
nice
sir.
talk, and so nice. It was if you are doing a comprehensive genomic analysis upfront, and you find a BRAF V600D mutation, you straight away go on to BRAF inhibitor, or you give chemotherapy now and then go on a second, because the
So usually,
results are not different responses, but you may get a longer benefit because you have got some chemotherapy upfront. And what is your policy?
Such a situation has not occurred so far. I've had one experience with the BRAF mutated patients whom we had treated with chemotherapy, and we detected the BRAF in the second testing. We didn't detect it in the first testing. And that patient finally went on to the combination therapy, and she's doing well for the last 1.5 years. And she had an oligoprogression, which we targeted with radiation. So far, it's not a very common mutation, so I would not hesitate from using the combination of BRAF inhibitors upfront if the patient can afford it, and there is no compelling reason to start with chemotherapy. So I would definitely go with the targeted therapy.
No, if
the
you
response
develop
rates are in excess of 60%. The progression-free survival is almost reaching about 1 year. So I think it's almost as good data as we have with EGFR first generation EGFR TKIs.
Do they tolerate chemotherapy after they fail on BRAF inhibitors?
Yes, I don't think so. There should be any reason that they should not be able to tolerate. Our patient didn't really suffer much. She tolerated the therapy quite well, and she's still on the therapy for last 1.5 years. And she was a massively treated patient.
I used in colon cancer, but tolerance is not that great, because sometimes we get into a lot of side effects, dose reduction.
Yeah.
That is only
So
2 cases I used it, sir.
Yeah, because colon cancer is a GI malignancy, and you have GI side effects of the drug. So perhaps, it is compounding the problems of the patient. Whereas non-small cell lung cancer, it doesn't have anything to do with the lung. Perhaps a lung cancer patient is likely to tolerate it better. Maybe there is compounding of the side effects.
Thank you, Dr. Manish, for a nice talk.